Welcome, dear readers. You are listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast. We are recording in the beautiful Carol Shields Auditorium in the wonderful Millennium Library here in Treaty 1 territory, and on land that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Today we will be discussing Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. I'm Alan Chorney, the branch head librarian at Transcona Library, and to my left is...
Hi, I'm Erica Ball. I'm the branch head librarian at Fort Garry Library, and across the table from me is...
Hi, my name's Kirsten, and I'm the branch head at the Harvey Smith Library. That's right, I haven't changed branches. West End Library is now the Harvey Smith Library, FYI. Across from me is...
Monique Waraniak. I'm an information services librarian at the Millennium Library, up on the 4th floor.
And our very first special guest on this podcast.
Yes. And between Monique and Kirsten is...
Hi, I'm Trevor, and I'm the branch head librarian at the Louis Riel Library.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And of course, we couldn't do this without you, dear readers. It's your questions and comments that get us started, so email us at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. Remember, only you can determine whether we laugh or cry. There will be spoilers, so each month be sure to find time to read the selected book so you can find Time to Read on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. We want to talk about what you want to talk about, so send your thoughts and comments anytime to wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca or find Winnipeg Public Library on social media and we'll incorporate your comments on the air. Make sure you stick around to the end for a special segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. But first, Kirsten is going to give us a brief bio that highlights the career of Eden Robinson, followed by Erica, who will spoil everything with a brief synopsis. So if you haven't read Son of a Trickster, this is your last chance to press pause. Don't worry, we'll wait. Kirsten, over to you.
Thanks. All right. Eden Robinson, born January 19th, 1968, and she herself says this was the same day as Edgar Allan Poe and Dolly Parton's birthdays.
Ooh.
Significant. Robinson grew up in the Haisla territory near Kitimat village, where she still lives today. She is a member of the Haisla and the Heiltsuk First Nations. Stephen King was a big literary influence, perhaps the biggest, she says, and she's known for her dark, gothic, and sometimes brutally violent stories, with still lots of very gritty humor. She graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from UVic and eventually a Master's in Creative Writing from UBC. Her first collection of short stories, Traplines, was published in 1995, and she followed it up with the most excellent Monkey Beach in 2000 and Blood Sports in 2006. She then had a difficult time writing for a number of years for a variety of personal reasons. She was diagnosed with celiac disease and she hit menopause, which affected her memory. I hear you, sister. And she says that she lost her motivation to write. But that motivation came back to her in 2010 after Enbridge announced plans to run a pipeline from Edmonton to Kitimat. And Robinson began writing op-eds, which she says re-energized her creativity and passion and ultimately triggered her writing again. And that writing then soon became Son of a Trickster. In 2017, she won the prestigious Writers' Trust Fellowship worth $50,000, which honors writers who demonstrate exceptional creative ability and outstanding promise in their publication to date.
Wow.
Eden Robinson.
Good job, Ms. Robinson.
And I don't know if any of you have heard her interviewed on the radio,
I have not.
She just sounds like she is such a joyful person, and she just sounds like she could definitely come to my house for dinner.
I feel like you don't even need to hear her. Just look at a picture of her.
I know, she just looks so, yeah. And so that,
laughing.
Yeah, so much laughing, yeah.
Yeah, well, you're just reading her book. There's so much humor in there, even when she's dealing with 10 million other difficult things.
Yeah.
There's so much humor in there. Okay, so, and it was neat about the Stephen King thing because I was surprised by the amount of horror in this specific book.
Right.
So here's your synopsis for Son of a Trickster. I've adapted some of it from the publisher's website, in case you recognize the wording. Jared can't count on his mom to stay sober and stick around. He can't rely on his dad to pay the bills and support his new wife and stepdaughter. Jared only wants to be like other 16-year-olds and hang out with his friends, but he feels like he is the one who must look out for his family as well as his elderly neighbors. And he's struggling, especially after his dumb dog, Baby Killer, dies. And he smokes weed and drinks, and sometimes he blacks out. And he puzzles over why his maternal grandmother has never liked him, why she says he's the son of a trickster, that he isn't human, and why ravens have begun speaking to him in English. Son of a Trickster is a unique combination of a coming-of-age story, a contemporary account of poverty and Canadian Indigenous life, magical realism, and maybe a little horror. Remember the otters? Oh my gosh. The otters. It's a story about doing your best in the worst situations, of growing up and facing the future head-on, and how maybe even the gods don't have it all figured out.
Does anyone have any thoughts that jump out at them from reading this book? Is this everyone's first time reading the book?
Yeah, this was my first time reading it for sure. And how about everyone else?
Yeah, I read it about 6 months ago, but I loved Monkey Beach that she wrote in 2000. So I was very excited to read this book, and I think I actually liked it even better than Monkey Beach.
This was my, I guess, second time reading the book, or it was sort of a hasty read. I read it maybe last year sometime for another recording that shall go unnamed. But that had been my first time reading it. And it's actually the first of Eden's books that I've read. I'm always embarrassed to say, especially Monkey Beach, because it did so well and it was, widely read. But yeah, no, this was my first of her books. And now that I hear that this is like the first in a trilogy,
right.
It's great. It's awesome.
So, Monique, I feel like we've had a conversation before where you say you don't read that much fiction. Is that true, or am I just putting you right on? I've exposed you.
Probably my reading, like if you were to break it down, ratio is probably about like 10% fiction and 90% not. And it's been like that for me my entire life. Even as a kid, I didn't love fiction. I mean, I devoured sort of the series that lots of young children did who grew up in the 80s, like Babysitter's Club and Sweet Valley High and lots of Judy Blume books and stuff like that. But I also remember being like super into biographies, and Princess Diana got married when I was in grade 2 or something. And I became obsessed with the royal family and family trees and like all that. And so there are tons of like classic young people's novels that I've never read because I never read them. And my parents would bring them for me and I just would pick up something else. So yeah, so I'm not a huge fiction reader, but it's slowly changing. My partner is a huge fiction reader. So, you get influenced by people you spend time with.
Just a little bit.
Well, and I would normally say that I read lots of fiction. I really do. But normally I would say that I don't read a lot that's dystopian or magic realism. But I feel like I say that, but in real life, I actually do read quite a few and I like it a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I have to just,
the way you think of yourself.
Break that. That narrative in myself. Yeah.
I'm trying to think about all the books we've read so far on this podcast. And I think I'd say all of them have some sort of a magic realism element to it,
And I've liked them all.
Yeah.
They've spoken to me.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because of the magic realism or in spite of the magic realism?
Well, magical realism is my wheelhouse, like all the way. Like books like this aren't a stretch for me at all, with the exception of it being really nice that it was Canadian and Indigenous, because I haven't read a lot of that. But especially like when the crow starts talking to him and all this stuff, like, and the gods and the half people, half animals thing. This is something that I've seen a lot of, especially
in your real life,
especially cross-cultural. Sure, why not? No, not in my real life, but in reading and stuff, because it's from an ancient tradition that goes back across cultures, a shamanistic kind of tradition. So if you read anything with Greek myth, if you read anything with Egyptian myth, if you read any any of these sort of old spiritual mystic stories, this is what it is. So I thought it was unique in the combination of stuff, but there was lots in it that I felt was really familiar, which was nice for me reading. And I read about, I would say, the opposite of Monique. I kind of read about 90% fiction, 10% nonfiction. So.
I remember when I was asked to first read the book, I mean, I was really happy to be asked to contribute to some discussion around it. But I knew because, I'd heard about the title, I thought, oh no. So excited to read something like about Eden, but I'm like, not magical realism. Because not only is that fiction, it's... and that's like, it is so far out of my wheelhouse. Like, just,
that's good though.
Just
that's
beyond,
good too.
right? So
Yeah.
it was good that,
Yeah.
it was something that I sort of had a happy obligation to do. And I admit I struggled at first with those parts of it and just sort of like letting go. I make it sound like I have no imagination. But I'm really glad I did. Like, I feel like it's still not my, not a genre I would reach for. But I think especially around connecting with stories from Indigenous nations around the country and using this as an avenue to learn about culture in like this really relevant way because it's coming right from the voice of the people. It fit for me on lots of levels, and I can see myself reading definitely more of this trilogy as it moves on, but other things too. Yeah.
Well, I was surprised though. I was expecting more magical realism throughout the whole book. Like it really only came full on the last
quarter.
Maybe. So I was kind of surprised. I mean, yes, it's sprinkled in, but that stuff I can just totally believe in real life. Like,
actually, I thought this was a good book to get into. That because it takes so long for the magical realism to come into the novel. In fact, I knew nothing about what the novel was about going into it, and then before I was about maybe 2/3 of the way through before we put out the questions for it, and I was like, magical realism? Am I reading the right book? I had to go.
His son is spelled S-U-N. It was like, oh no, it's a classic mistake. Well, I know what you mean. And for me, it kind of worked the opposite way, where I didn't really connect to the book until it got to the magic realism stuff. And I felt like it came too little, too late for me. I would have liked to have either had those elements introduced earlier in the book, because to me, it was just this poor kid in the situation, and then around all these mediocre people, they're bringing him down, and you're pulling for him, and it's just like you feel like he's on this merry-go-round of sadness and ugliness, and then the ravens start talking, and then I'm like, oh, I can get behind this, and
that's the fun part, right?
And just kind of like this takes you out of like the like his horrible life, which is his reality, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That maybe bodes well for books 2 and 3 of the trilogy if she set up this magic world, and I love how we could just jump right to the end, right? We don't need to where when the trickster's sister, his monster aunt, introduces him to AA, and gets him kind of so she's like a demon or a creature, but she seems to like maybe be a protective spirit, but you can't trust them, right? You can't trust the
they all have
demons.
their own things
so
going on.
I love that
politics.
There's that quality, and then she was always displayed herself as this old lady, but who like there's like a monster inside her or something. Like I was like, what is happening? But
well, that's what I really liked about it. I liked that it wasn't just like some being that was benevolent and helping him, and then some being that was trying to cause him harm. There are all these like complicated beings with their own relationship, and he's in the middle of it.
And you're learning he's learning from all of them.
Yeah,
right?
he's learning from all of them. But then it's like, and who's on your side and who's not on your side? The grandmother who always hated him turns out to be the one who was right the whole time.
I like the other grandma at the beginning where she like took him out to the movies and like rigged up this whole like situation where there's like a fake, put blankets around a body and it's just put on all these DVDs so she could go out and eat popcorn But
she turned out to be such a disappointing character.
Well, she was kind of out of the book for most of it, right? Just sending postcards and whatnot about her honeymoon.
Well, yeah, and then at the end she's like, "Oh, you're not my real blood so long." Like it doesn't matter that we've had this relationship for the past however many years. Come on.
Yeah, I thought that was a little strange
harsh,
too.
right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that there were any characters that I liked except for Jared in this book, and like they were all kind of sucky, or at least sucky from some
we did have a question
Jared's
like that
perspective.
Who was your favorite character in Son of a Trickster?
We did have that.
Who was
question.
the most memorable, and are they the same character? So Jared was yours?
Jared was definitely my favorite character. I think he really pulled the book together.
I know you have picky criteria for your heroes.
Yes.
Did he meet all your criteria to being active and not like being
No,
really? He didn't he wasn't tough enough?
I still liked him, and I thought he was strong, like a good character. But I was reading this in the Toronto Star review for this book called it plotless, which I think is very true, at least in terms of like a traditional narrative structure.
I disagree.
When we say plot list,
As we do.
That made me think of, I'm sure you guys have all seen Gaiman's movie, My Winnipeg.
Yes.
And the opening scene, there's just that guy on the train, and he's like nodding off to sleep, and he's trying to leave Winnipeg, but he's always back in Winnipeg. And I that's sort of, I felt like, but instead of Winnipeg, it was Kitimat. Just like, I just want to get out of there, but no, I'm pulled back in. But it probably wasn't the train, it was the bus, when he was going to visit his father. I was like, I just want him just to get out, get to Vancouver, get somewhere,
Yeah.
I was like, that town. Sorry, the good people of Kitimat. I'm sure it's a wonderful place to visit.
Just like Winnipeg.
So before we get to everyone else's favorite characters, we did have someone post on our website, just like you can. Our website's at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. And Amy wrote, my favorite character was the grandmother. Although she calls him awful cuss words, as she truly believes he is the trickster, she watches out for him and offers him an escape if things get to be too much. I think she is where he learned some of his empathy.
Right.
Was this the first grandmother?
The maternal
mom's
grandmother who who thought he was
kind of cursed him out at the
Right.
beginning. And
then came around.
well, like you were saying, that she ended up being the one that actually it was taking kind of care of him or looking out for him.
Told the truth the whole time. Everybody else was using him or lying or whatever. Yeah. Who wants to do their favorite character?
Well, I mean, I guess I don't really have a favorite character. I really liked Jared. I just was sort of in awe of him a little bit, that he was just still such a compassionate guy, and he was so smart and quite funny and witty. And even though his family was so dysfunctional, but there was still, I don't know, something there. Like, I didn't think that it was just so terrible. Like, there was still some really sort of strength and foundation in his family, even though on the surface there was some really awful things that happened, but
because he and his mom still expressed their affection for each other.
And
they
their
were
little
a
text
team.
messages and stuff. They had their little
that was really
routine.
sweet.
Yeah,
I definitely picked up on that throughout the book as well. But then at the end, the last chapter where he's in AA and he's kind of trying to pull his life together in that sense, his mom is amongst the people who's calling him out for changing and what are you too good for the life we used to have, kind of.
But that's a very human response, right? I mean, it's not a great response, but when you see someone doing well, the group dynamic is, who's that guy think he is?
You're too good for me.
Yeah. And so, but I agree with,
I think you're better than me.
Yeah, it was kind of sad to see their relationship at that point. At least we have 2 more books to see how it works out. But at that point, they're not a good place.
Yeah, well, the mom was my favorite character, even though she was horrible. I guess I haven't read a lot of books with characters like her. I feel like every scene that she was in, she stole the scene. And I never knew what she was going to do next. And I just liked the moments when she did awesome. And then I also liked the moments when she was just horrible, because I liked disliking her for those reasons. I just thought she was a very complex character. And I don't have any firsthand experience with people with addiction and all that stuff, but you kind of imagine it's got to be like that. Despite them trying as hard as they can, this is what life has taught them. And this is their specific thing that they're struggling with. So, but she obviously loves this kid more than anything, but has had and is going through a really horrible life. Yeah. Basically. Yeah. But I love that she's also a witch, and she's just
I was going to say, plus she knows more about the world that she can't feel like she can really be perfectly honest with her son while he was younger. Now that it's kind of all out, it'll be interesting to see where the story goes.
But I loved that scene where she tells him that she's a witch and that his girlfriend's a witch, and it's kind of how did you not figure this out already? This is super obvious. That was a really funny scene.
Did you have something to say, Monique? I feel like we have to, the 4 of us, we kind of jump in all the time, and it's Monique, just jump on in.
I was trying to think of an answer to the question. My instinct was to say Jared, and his mom was a very close number 2, and not only because she was in so much of the book, but I think I just really enjoyed those 2 and by extension the grandmothers and even some of the ex-boyfriends and his dad, just as a whole. So I think my favorite character is the family unit as a whole, right? And I just really like the way he went back and forth, and I don't know. I did relate to a lot of the things in the book. We were saying, somebody had said before that before we started recording that somebody had mentioned or had read somewhere that this book had like the most vomit in it. I can't relate to that quantity of vomit. But
that was the magic realism.
Yeah, exactly. I think Eden Robinson's ear for what some of those relationships look like is very strong. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I agree with Erica. Like I really liked the mom as a character, even though, you know, she's obviously like in huge amounts of pain and throwing that pain onto her family. But, you know, I love the story about her. I can't remember which partner it was, but like staple gunning him to
yeah.
I was like, yes,
David.
right?
Yeah.
Like, that's an amazing act of like standing up for yourself.
Yeah.
And
Like,
the part where she does it into court as well, where they're like, she could have got off easy if she had just claimed self-defense.
no,
but
and
no.
she's just like, no, like I was right. And so I just thought like so remarkable, like, and to swing from that to, like Erica said, like the really evident affection and love that she has.
I love
for her
your
child.
guts. She kept saying, that's what she kept saying. Love your guts.
Love your
I'm
guts.
like, that's so cute.
Yeah, emphasis on the guts, right? But yeah, I just think as a family unit, I think they're pretty extraordinary. And I think like you kind of hinted at it, Kirsten, like even though he's going through all of this stuff and he must, I mean, and Eden has him saying it, right? Like he must on certain days just feel awful. Like you never get the sense that he's either given up or that like there's this underlying thread of like baseline happiness or something there. Or like, I don't want, like, I think the word resilience is so overused, but like, you
That
know,
was
but there's
the word
like
I was about to use.
But there's something there. Like you never get the sense that like I was never totally worried about Jared.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
would
I'm
agree.
like, no, he's gonna be fine.
That's
This
why I was
kid's
in
getting
awe
put
of him.
through
He
hell.
was like
he's gonna be great.
Teenager,
You know?
and and you felt confident in him and his abilities.
He wakes up, maybe he throws up again, maybe he has something to eat, and then he just sort of like keeps going, and then he gets up the next day and he just keeps going.
And I think maybe that's why I think like the family is my favorite character, because I think that doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
like, so even if he's not getting lots of things that he might need or want from his family, like they obviously as a whole collectively gave him something.
Some kind of strength.
And
Because
continue
otherwise
to.
we would be way more worried about him.
Yeah.
Well, there probably wouldn't be a book about him.
Yeah,
He'd be just the kid who just like sits in his basement all day and like, doesn't even
Throwing
try
up.
anymore.
Which reminds me of another minor character that needs mention is Crash Pad. You know, I can relate to him. All he wants to do is sit around and watch Doctor Who marathons, and I thought he was kind of a great comic relief, where you know he would pop up now and again as a kind of a safe place for Jared to go hang out.
Safe guy, and a loving guy.
Yeah, exactly. He's kind of a simple guy. He has simple wants, and
Jared,
he knew
you're
he
the
wanted
coolest. Can you call me Crash Pad?
them. Yeah.
Yeah, he was really sweet.
I like to see some fan fiction about Crash Pad.
I hope he comes back in the sequels.
Better.
I felt he was like the character you could most look up to, or at least the character with the fewest problems.
Yeah, he's just a kid.
He was kind of simple in every meaning of the word.
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm the branch head librarian at Transcona Library. You may remember me from such Time to Read podcast episodes as Episode 2, Middlesex, and Episode 4, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. People on the street often stop me and ask, Alan, you always seem to know what's going on at Winnipeg Public Library. How do you do it? And I would reply with 3 simple words, at the library. I'd click my heels together and continue along my merry way. This worked out well, or so I thought, until my friend Gary asks me,
Hey, Alan, you always seem to know what's going on at Winnipeg Public Library. How do you do it?
and I replied, as I always do, at the library.
So you have to go to the library to find out what's going on at the library?
I thought Gary was just being Gary. Then I thought about it for a moment, and that's when my stomach sank and sirens began going off in my head. Gary thought I literally meant at the library, when what I really meant was at the library, subtitle, Your Guide to Winnipeg Public Library, the bi-monthly brochure available in print and online by Winnipeg Public Library that has a membership guide, lists all of WPL's upcoming programs and events, tells you the opening hours of each of our 20 branches, and which locations have free Wi-Fi. Spoiler alert, all of them.
Are you okay there, Alan?
Yeah, I'm okay, Gary.
Because you just kind of spaced out there for a minute.
I know, Gary. I realized I need to explain to you. In fact, I need to explain to a lot of people that at the library doesn't always literally mean at the library.
You mean because of Winnipeg Public Library's wide selection of ebooks and other online resources?
So animals.
So animals.
One of the questions that we asked was, Jared's constant companion was his beloved dog, Baby Killer. Have you had an intense relationship with a pet like Jared has had with Baby?
So this dog, his name was Bailey, and he was my first dog, but I was in my 20s when we got him. And he was great. He was a soft-coated Wheaten Terrier, but the poor thing had 2 bad allergies. He was allergic to grass, and he was allergic to dog dander. So he was allergic to himself and grass. And so he would scratch himself bald on his side. And that's when I saw that soft-coated Wheaten Terriers have like dark skin. Because just these dark patches, but he lived. He had as good a life as you could hope for a dog that was looked like he had the mange, and but the scene where they had to put Jared's dog down reminded me of the horrible night that we had to say goodnight to Bailey, and what it was is I guess he got quite sick. I saw him the night before, and I think he knew it was going to be his last night because he came over to me and he just licked my knuckles as if he was just going to say it's going to be okay. I didn't realize at that point that was the last time I was going to see him, and so the next day he took a turn. So my mom took him into the vet, and it all happened very fast, and she had him put down. But it happened to also be on my birthday. So my mom didn't want to tell me until later what happened. So I remember going out to a movie with Marla. I remember it was Inside Man, the Spike Lee movie. And we came home, and there was a voicemail message from my brother who was living out of town. He's like, "Oh, hey, Trev, happy birthday! I'm sorry to hear about Bailey. Anyway, we'll talk soon. Love you." And I was just off the phone. I'm like, what happened to Bailey? And so I dialed my mom up right away, and then I was just like, what happened to Bailey? And then there's this pause. She's like, I wish you hadn't found out that way. And then so yeah, Bailey, rest in peace. 2006. I cried more for that dog than some family members who have passed away, and I've never loved a dog the same way as Bailey. So
have you had any visions of Bailey returning?
Coming back? Yeah.
Well, I dream about him sometimes.
Oh.
But
licking your knuckles.
Yeah, just a little lick. It wasn't a gross lick. It was just a little.
Love you.
Yeah, just a little. Yeah, exactly. So. Sorry, everybody, for bringing the podcast down.
I don't know if anybody's going to be able to beat that story.
I know.
That's the craziest
Trevor
story.
has to go last.
I know. You started, and I was like, okay, is this the part where we're playing 2 truths and a lie?
It's absolutely true. My mom listens to this podcast. She can vouch for it if anyone is.
Allergies are amazing.
I know.
Okay, so where did he do his business if he couldn't go on the grass?
He did it on the grass, and it was a very itchy business.
Horrible.
It was. I've never heard of a dog being allergic to himself. Is it even a thing? It is a thing.
You got Dennis, by the way. Dennis was laughing, our audio producer. That was pretty funny.
So another reason why I thought at first I would have some trouble relating to the book is because we weren't a very animal-centric family.
That's a good way.
My parents weren't super fans of having pets. We had a cat when I was really young, a toddler, who we were set to move to Germany for 2 years. She just ran away and didn't come back. And I think my parents were kind of like, oh, good, we don't have to take care of
Problem solved.
That's what they told you.
Yeah,
she ran away.
But she just sort of, anyway.
Wow. That's rather convenient timing.
Yeah.
Too convenient.
But my brother, for a long time, he always had hamsters and gerbils and stuff like that. And I remember I was in grade 6, which would make him in grade 4. And I was at school, after school one day, doing a musical rehearsal or something. And my name got called over the intercom. And I was like, the school's closed. Is there even anyone in the office? And so I went there. The secretary was still there. And it was my brother on the phone. He was at home and he was crying. And he said, Marie. He can't even breathe. And I'm like, what's going on? Right. And my mom wouldn't have been home from work yet. I think he was there with, I don't know if I'm assuming he was there with a babysitter because he was only
probably not. It was the 70s, 80s.
And I was like, what? And he's like, it's Frank. Frank's dead. Right? And I'm like, what? So Frank was his gerbil, right? And I was just like, oh. And then he's like, Mom killed him. Right? And I went, what?
Good Lord.
So I'm like, so I just like run back to the gym and I tell my teacher, I have to go home. My brother needs
Frank's
help."
dead.
Frank's dead, right? So I run home, and what it was is that my mom had thought she had heard a mouse in the basement, right? There had never been any evidence of the mouse or anything, but my mom had thought one time she had gone down in the laundry, I guess, or something, and heard some rustling and was like, you know what, maybe. So she had put a trap behind the couch. Sean was cleaning Frank's cage and put him in one of those balls,
Yes.
you know, right? I guess he didn't lock it totally or whatever. Frank got out, was totally attracted to whatever the heck my mom, had juiced up the trap with.
Peanut butter.
And he got caught in the trap and died.
That's brutal.
So my brother was sitting there and was not wanting to go look behind the couch. And he's just like, I haven't looked to see, but I know he's dead. Right? So I looked and I'm like, he's dead. Right? Like
Frank's dead, baby.
And, he didn't. Like, I remember when my mom came home from work and my brother was just not happy.
My goodness.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
Anyway, but
Traumatized.
I don't think he got another one after that I remember. I think that was
No,
kind
you
of
wouldn't.
it.
Yeah. Traumatic.
There was a series of them, but it ended with Frank.
Yeah, pets have a magical place in our hearts.
Yeah.
Do you have any pet stories, Erica?
Sure. I mean, we could probably talk the rest of the podcast about our pets, but should we talk about the book more?
Oh, I guess.
Fine. If you don't want to hear about the time I almost got castrated by a dog.
I never said that you shouldn't
That's
share.
the bonus content for the platinum
I think we
subscribers.
very much need to hear this now.
So I don't much like dogs, and this is
Because
That checks out.
this started. I was in like my early 20s, and I was just like walking around the corner, and all of a sudden, this like giant dog like lunges at my junk and like mouth open. And the only reason he didn't castrate me is because his teeth bounced off my pubic bone.
What?
Back far enough.
gosh.
Can we say pubic bone?
I'm not sure you can say junk.
We'll leave it up to Dennis whether or not to leave this out. Maybe we'll check with our supervisor. So you were bitten.
No, they didn't.
It like bounced off and then snapped, and then the owner like pulled back on the leash. And then the owner had
I need a
the
diagram.
Why isn't there a video of this that we're
I know,
posting?
really.
I'll draw it out in paint. No, I won't.
No.
And then the
That's
owner
scary.
had the audacity to be like, "You should watch where you're going."
Oh,
That's the
And
worst.
I was like, "It's your dog that just about."
Oh,
You
my
should wear a
goodness.
cup.
Yeah, blame the victim much. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so I probably have about 10 million stories about my ridiculous dogs because they are
Ridiculous.
They are ridiculous. As somebody at this table has dog sat one of them for me before, so can attest to how ridiculous she is. Yeah.
She is, but I would say Juno is also an emotional genius in her own way.
In her own way. She's very idiosyncratic. But yeah, what reminded me most of my dogs with the baby killer stuff was when they were at the vet and they were learning what was wrong and that she was going to have to be put down, because I had one of those situations where I felt like that it could have gone that way. Mm-hmm. And I think probably, it will come eventually because they're not really young dogs anymore. But one of my dogs a couple years ago got quite sick and we weren't sure exactly what it was. And so we ended up having to leave her at the vets and they weren't sure what they were going to find and if they're going to be able to treat it. So it was a very difficult couple of days of not knowing if she was going to be coming home. So but that's part of what happens when you welcome animals, small and big, into your lives.
Mm-hmm.
And hearts.
And hearts.
Hearts and homes.
So I think Baby Killer was meant to be a funny part of the book. I'm not really sure. Farting dogs are low on the list of things that I find humorous.
Oh, they're hilarious.
But humor does play a large role in the book, and we did ask about this on our website. So we asked, what was your favorite, funniest bit from the novel?
Well, I think I already said mine is that scene where the mom is telling Jared that she's a witch and that all these things are real and that he hasn't been hallucinating because of too many drugs. And he was having trouble believing it. And she was calling him like dense and all this stuff. Like, don't you understand what you've been witnessing? Because that's what I love about books with magic in them is that moment where the world is revealed. And I guess maybe that's because I wish that would happen in my life.
Did
where all is revealed
Where it's just like, yes, there's this
by
whole
some
magical
fireflies that come and
Well, yeah, like
philosophize
ever since when
around.
I was little, those were my favorite books when I was little too. Is the
Yeah.
ones where there's, like you go through the secret door, or you're like, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You go through the wardrobe, or you go through the curtain is pulled back, and it's there's this whole other world that is parallel to ours, but has all these like wonderful, marvelous things in it.
Did anyone laugh out loud when they were reading this book?
I laughed out loud pretty early on in the scene with the truck. Right at the beginning when she goes after, it's his mom, right? This is terrible. Like my head for details.
It's been a
Right?
while since you had.
But basically, is it the neighbor that she, no, it's somebody comes to settle a debt from a former boyfriend of hers, not the current one. And I think it's Richie that comes.
It is.
initially.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right
Yeah.
at the very beginning.
Because it's
And-
Richie's dogs at the beginning.
Exactly, yeah. And then she just goes after him with the truck. And for some reason, when I was just reading it, right? And I was like, all of a sudden it was just like, brah, like, she was just like, and I just remember laughing out loud and thinking it was amazing.
It's outrageous. Yeah.
And I don't know. It was like those moments. And I laughed out loud again when they talk about how her mom went after her ex or whatever with the staple gun. And I just think because it's so outrageous, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, certainly these things do happen, but I don't know.
Not in
There's
your
just
life.
something, or I don't know what it says about me that I want to do these things.
But she's acting it out. The stuff that you would love to do.
Yeah.
She's actually like brave enough to just do it.
But that was, so I remember laughing out loud.
Yeah, I was just going to say
right away.
revenge fantasy. Yeah. Maybe it's something women commonly feel.
Well, that's funny because I did not laugh out loud, but I wasn't sure when I was reading it whether like things were funny or like I was like is this funny or is this serious? Like if someone had told me ahead of time this is super funny, I might have been relaxed more when I was reading it. But I think I was just so invested in Jared's life that nothing, like even the stuff that seemed kind of funny, I was like I don't know, is this
it's a dark
should we
kind of-
laugh?
Yeah,
It's such a
exactly.
dark
Should we laugh
humor.
at this? Yeah, that was my take. But,
and ironic.
But again, like I found little moments like with Crash Pad and stuff. I enjoyed those. I didn't laugh out loud, but I sort of found those were the lighter moments.
Yeah, I'd agree with Trevor. Like the same thing happened with the humor in the book for me is I was reading through it, saw the questions, and I was like, oh, this book is supposed to be funny.
Oh no.
And I just I didn't find it funny, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment from the book. It just kind of the banter between Jared and the other teenagers and stuff. I was like, it kind of just made me cringe as opposed to laugh at it.
Yeah, because I quite liked the banter. Yeah, and the rapport, and that he had with his mom, and or with some of the fireflies and the raven, those I found were that rapport was kind of funny. Yeah, to me,
didn't do anything.
You know what I'm happy about? I'm happy that the questions are so helpful to you in your reading.
It tells you what to think.
They explain the book.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the values of a book club, right? You come and you may not sure if you like the book or not, or didn't get. And here we are discussing it, and maybe I'm definitely getting a new appreciation for it that maybe I didn't have coming in here. So,
yay, book clubs!
Yay.
I think even the titles of the chapters, I remember skimming them before I read the book, and they sounded very much like having not read Eden Robinson's stuff, but having heard her on the radio a lot and seen videos, I sort of knew that whether or not it took a while or whatever, there would be, humor running through the book. And the chapter titles, I mean, there's sort of Norman Rockwell Redux. I think the oxydipal complex, or I'm going to mispronounce that, but instead of Oedipals, she's, thrown in.
Oh, yeah, the oxy.
Yeah. Reference. Yeah. And Welcome to the Jungle. So there's all these 80s big hair rock band,
Yeah.
My favorite chapter title was the Star Wars reference. We'll always have Alderaan.
So it's I mean, you can just see it sort of, I don't know, bouncing along. And just other things, I can relate to what you said, Alan, or a lot of it for me anyway wasn't laugh out loud funny and what you said, Trevor. But it's just these little bits of kind of lightness drop through, when he's talking to Monster Ant, Trickster's sister at the end, and she's saying oh, you're number 361, son, or whatever, and just there's a website if you want to connect with all these, right? It's these little things, right?
Yeah.
That are just sort of tossed in and make it
funny.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it just shows then the complexity of life. Yes, his life and his family, it's really difficult and hard and dysfunctional, but he still does find humor and some beauty in it. And I think that it's hard for things to be totally black and white, right? I mean, I think there is a complexity in life and relationships, and he's obviously been able to sort of figure his out and navigate his way through. Yeah.
And he's known to be I was going to say smart ass. You're
allowed to say that.
Okay.
We just said junk, so yeah.
I don't know who it's... But he's a sarcastic guy.
Yeah.
He's known for having a quip and coming back at everything about it. So
it's like his mother always says, life is hard, but you have to be harder.
Yeah, which is like the saddest thing I've ever heard.
The first time I heard that line, I was like, oh, that's like kind of cheesy and cliche. But I one of the things I liked about this book was that the way she kept repeating that line and the way it kept appearing in Jared's head, I thought by the end of it, I was like, oh yeah, she really made that work, and she really put the effort into getting such a what could be a trite line to really pay off for Jared's character.
Yeah, I think it did, but I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true. I don't think you have to be harder because life is hard. I don't think that's the way to respond to hard times, isn't to be harder. That's not the way I respond to hard times, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That wouldn't work for me.
I guess that's true, but I mean, it is a philosophy that a lot of people throughout society
life shouldn't be a battle, and it shouldn't be,
Right, but just because it shouldn't be doesn't mean that it isn't.
And he's such
I don't think that it. Nope. I think that I would
Let's
say
all vote.
that I would say that it's not that doesn't mean that it's not a struggle or that it's whatever. But when you put it like that, it makes it sound like you against X. It makes it sound like you against the world or you against other people. And I think that just sets it up to be harder than it has to be. So I could see that's obviously his mom's mantra. But I also disagree with a lot of the things his mom does with her life. So I'm not going to listen to that.
And that's almost been like her coping, is just to be harder against the world that's super hard. Meanwhile, Jared is this really empathetic, compassionate person. And
who's doing better? Who's doing better? Let me ask you that.
Yeah.
But when he was facing hard times, what advice did Jared take to help him get through things? I think it was you have to be harder. He did repeat that to himself. And I think it was... even if you don't need to be harder all the time, it's something that he did, pull from his tool belt in difficult times in the book.
I think he took parts of that advice, definitely, because, I mean, there was points in the book where, you almost felt he was being taken advantage of a little bit, and that wasn't great, kind of on his part. And I felt like, I was sort of the same. I'm like, oh, I don't want him to completely harden up because that might get you through, but it's a very difficult way to get through. But I think he took on, he would take on a little bit of that and be like, no, you can't crash here anymore, or you can't do this, or with his sister, you take off, I'm not going to help you again. Right. And so, I was happy to see him take on some of that and
set some
translate
boundaries.
It into boundaries. Yeah. As opposed to,
I think when the two other books in this trilogy come out, this is something that we should track throughout the other books. This philosophy and
somebody write it down.
Right. Well, for me, every time that saying came up in the book, I thought of another saying that was very similar, and I don't know if it's attributed to one person, but I remember hearing it from, I think his name was Tony Dungy. He was the football coach for the Indianapolis Colts. It was, life is hard, but God is good. And that was his life mantra. And so whenever I read that, I was thinking of that in my head and thinking that's a little, maybe a softer philosophy that might be more appealing than, say, life is hard, you gotta be harder.
Yeah, that feels a little bit too much like an eye for an eye. I prefer something like love is stronger than hate. That's what I like better. Life is hard.
This has been the affirmation section of the podcast already. Yeah.
Life is hard. Let's all be nicer to each other. How about that?
This should have been a question. We should have had a what's your mantra?
We should have had. Yeah. Oh well.
Winnipeg Public Library offers free 24/7 access to Lynda Library, a version of lynda.com for libraries. Lynda Library is a leading online learning resource that provides thousands of instructional videos and online courses. There is something for everyone, from the very beginner to the professional. Each video course is presented by a subject matter expert in a clear, easy-to-follow way. Many of the courses include downloadable material you can use to follow along with the instructor. Learn about photography, web design, Photoshop, music production,
3D graphics, software development, and more. New courses are added regularly, and older courses are updated as needed. To access Lynda Library, go to winnipeg.ca/library and click on the Databases button. Scroll down to Lynda Library and click to enter. After you've entered your library card information, you'll be at Lynda's website. If this is your first time, click on the Create a Profile link, which lets you keep track of which courses you've taken and how far along you are in each one. Once you're logged in, you can explore the vast array of courses now available to you. Enjoy!
But I just want to take it back to one more question before we start wrapping things up here. I want to take it back to the question we asked: the talking ravens and philosophizing fireflies, magic and the supernatural play a large role in this book. Does it ever seem like there's magic in your life? And I just want to give a shout out to Pat, who found us on Facebook and said yes, but not as often as I'd like. So
yeah, we hear you, Pat.
I want to give everyone a chance to talk about the magic in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel the same as Pat. I wish that there was a lot more, but sometimes you do feel like it's there when there's a bunch of odd coincidences that happen at the same time, or when either the worst possible outcome, like say with your brother, and like what are the chances with his gerbil that she'd put out the trap and then he wouldn't do the ball, and like bizarre things happen, or really 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 unlikely things happen, and you kind of have a feeling like that's how it's meant to be, or there was some sort of force making it happen like that. I've definitely had that feeling.
As I'm going to disagree with you.
That's
as the
your feelings are wrong.
As an ultra rational logistical
Your feelings
person,
about magic
I'm
wrong.
like, I like magic in books. I don't think magic exists in real life. And I was actually just reading a book that was talking about the logic of why we think coincidences like that are so meaningful, is because we know there's a small chance of any one thing happening, but there's a whole bunch of small one things that can happen. Yeah. So one of the chance of one of them happening is high. Mm-hmm. So there's always a chance that something that seems like that's playing against the odds is happening, but it's just that there are so many things against the odds that something is bound to happen.
Yeah, and I understand people like you, Alan. I understand the desire to understand what's going on. Yep. But you know what? They still don't know how bumblebees fly. Bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly.
That's true.
They're magic.
They're magic.
And my girlfriend is always on my case about how logical I am. So
yes, but that's, good. Diversity is our strength. There's another affirmation.
I read runestones quite a bit for myself and for others. And I have to say, even though it's not really fortune telling and it's really, the runestones just really are telling you what you already know inside. But still, sometimes the readings are pretty magical. And those of you in the audience who have had the runestones read by me know what I'm talking about. So I feel like I have magic in my life actually quite often.
Kirsten's going to have to convince me sometime.
I will bring the runestones to our next.
I think it's totally possible, just to insert myself again in this conversation. I think it's totally possible that things that we don't have a scientific or logical explanation for right now doesn't mean we won't ever. Like somebody like Jung, for example, like people are, and a lot of like neuroscience and stuff like this are starting to come up with these explanations for things, for why they may be connected when we don't see a connection. So yeah, who knows what we'll know 100 years from now as to why things like your intuition, the subconscious mind, all these other things might come up.
So we can all meet back here in 100 years and see if Erica or Alan is right.
We're both probably right.
I feel like we're an inverse X-Files where I'm Dana Scully and you're Fox Mulder.
That would be a good show.
I think, I don't know, I relate a lot to what Alan said in that I disagree with all of it. I have the same dynamic with myself and my partner, and I think he's reading the same book you just read recently. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a ton of magic in my life, and for me, it's more of a matter of just like being open to seeing it and recognizing connections and things, and little big connections or little coincidences and big coincidences and all those little strange things and big strange things. They always seem to be happening to me. And it's been like that my entire life. Like I'll be thinking of something and then I'll run into the exact person at the grocery store, like little things like that, to just bigger things where like I had no idea why I would have possibly met and had some really unique conversation with somebody. And then like 8 years later, they're walking into my office or something. Right. And so, yeah, my partner would say, well, that's an extraordinary coincidence, right? That's usually right. But I like to think it's magic. And it's certainly not the kind of magic that is present in the book. And that kind of magic is something that I have more trouble relating to just because of who I am. But the magic that's in the book gave me like a greater appreciation of the importance of the environment and the sense of connectedness and all of the teachings and the ways that you can read the environment and pass knowledge down from it, and both for physical survival and emotional and mental health that is inherent in so many Indigenous cultures, and including the many along the West Coast. And that's something that I had, of course, always like read about or heard about, but not being part of those belief systems myself. You know, there's still just sort of things you read about, you don't experience them. And so this is like the great gift of fiction, right? Can't obviously experience it as Jared would or as Eden does in her life, perhaps, but to get just a little bit of glance into it. And then reading, because I actually didn't know that little tidbit that you had read in the bio at the beginning. I knew she hadn't written in a long time, but I didn't know that one of the things that kind of spurred her on was the resource development and the pipelines. And then thinking about connecting that to things in the news and how, like, you know, we all know it's environmental nightmare, you know, when those things leak or go wrong. But it's not like just the environment, I'm putting just in quotes. It would wipe out all of these characters in this story. Yeah. You know, it wouldn't be, if there's no bear, there's no bear. If there's no otters, there's no, like you couldn't even have this story.
Yeah.
And I think that, this is one thing that definitely gave me like a deeper or a more grounded appreciation of some of the things that lots of Indigenous nations are struggling against.
Yeah, for sure.
That was so interesting in the bio. It made sense. Right?
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. Trevor, did you talk about magic yet?
No, I didn't. I mean, I'm not really sure where I come down on magic. I think I certainly have moments that feel magical. And one that came to mind while we were talking was when I was a little kid, one of my favorite authors was this guy called John Bellairs, and he wrote stories like The House with the Clock in Its Walls, Figure in the Shadows. They were kind of like pre-Harry Potter. There was wizards and ghosts and things. And so anyway, a huge fan. And one day, one summer, my wife Marla and I were driving to Toronto, so we took a detour to Marshall, Michigan, which was John Bellairs' hometown. And we just did the total geek walking tour thing, going around looking at the houses and the inspiration for all of the stories. And it was great. And of course, it deals with ghosts and goblins, so we had to visit the cemetery, which is on the edge of town. And we went there after supper, and we pulled up, and the sun was just sort of setting, and there was this big sign. It was a classic sign, like from a horror movie. It said, "No trespassing after dark." So I was like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And this is America. I don't want to get shot. So I'm sitting in the car. Before I hear anything, the car door goes, and out goes Marla, and she's in through the gates and disappeared behind like a tombstone. I'm like, oh my God. I go out after her, and I'm kind of fumbling around this old cemetery, which was the inspiration of all these books I read when I was 12 years old. And I caught up with Marla, and then all of a sudden, all around us, there were fireflies.
No.
And it was probably one of the most magical moments that might have been a coincidence. I'm sure it was. But it was a magical coincidence.
Sounds like magic.
Yeah. And here I was. I was like 12 years old again, you know, standing in this graveyard and surrounded by fireflies. So magic.
That's the best.
That is magic.
Story.
What a great way to end this. As we leave behind Son of a Trickster, we are going to have our favorite awkwardly worded segment. Can you tell me a book you would also like? So who has a book they would like to recommend?
Mine will be the ones that I was sort of reminded of reading it. And one of them is American Gods by Neil Gaiman, in terms of the sort of gradually revealing that gods are walking around and talking to people and doing their thing. And then the other one was Birdie by Tracy Lindbergh, who I believe is a Cree author, because it's a similar story of a youth, but it's a young woman trying to grow up and trying to get past her childhood and process the things that she's experienced experienced. The magic in that book is more in terms of her dreams and the things that she works out through her dreams, but it has that same sort of what's real, what's not real, what's part of tradition, what's happening now. So American Gods by Neil Gaiman and Birdie by Tracy Lindbergh.
I have a couple of books too that I would recommend if you enjoyed Son of a Trickster. One is called One Good Story, that one, by Thomas King. And it's a bit of a cheat because I was reading that this was one of the inspirations for Eden Robinson for when she was writing Son of a Trickster. So what this is a collection of short stories lifting elements of Indigenous mythology. It's very humorous, and some of the stories are poignant. I didn't understand a lot of it, just like Son of a Trickster. But there was one story in particular that stood out called Borders. And it's the story about a mother and a son who are trying to cross the Canadian border into the States from Alberta to visit her daughter in Salt Lake City. But they get caught in a geopolitical vacuum because when she tells the border guard what her nation is, she says Blackfoot. And they say, you can't come in. And so you have to go back to Canada. So she goes to the Canadian border side and says, in the same question, what's your nation? Blackfoot. Well, there's no such thing. You're either Canadian or American. So she is stuck in the duty-free shop with her son for quite some time. I won't say how it ends, but it's funny, and it's so there's that story. The second one, completely different culture, but similar feeling, was Trainspotting by Irving Welsh. It's a 1993 novel that was made into a movie in 96 by Danny Boyle. Both Trainspotting and Son of a Preacher weave stories about young men and addiction. Both have likable protagonists for whom you root. Renton in Trainspotting and, of course, Jared. Both are surrounded, again, by mediocre influences and role models. Both stories include a fair amount of magic realism. And although Jared's story isn't done, we know there's 2 more books, his attempt, or hopefully sticking with sobriety, and Renton's escape to Amsterdam both end well.
Yay.
And so those are my 2 picks.
They also share quite a bit of vomit.
Dirty bathrooms. Dirty bathrooms.
Yeah, there's a scene from that movie that
The movie still holds up, though.
It's a great movie. I have to,
A book that I read next. Didn't somebody do that at one of our last book clubs?
I do
it was like, what I read next actually was The Marrow Thieves by Cherry DeMaline. So, like Son of a Trickster, the main character is this really intelligent, strong feeler, Indigenous young man who is navigating his way after global warming has progressed to a point of almost apocalyptic proportions. So he's traveling through the earth with some other fellow survivors, and the way that they survive is actually to hide because they're being sought after, because Indigenous people are being hunted for their marrow, because they're the only ones left who can still dream. So that's sort of, I guess, some of the magic as well. I thought this was a great, easy read, but it really stayed with me for a really long time. I really, really liked that book. So
it looks really good.
The Marrow Thieves.
Okay, so Monique, did you have any recommendations?
Just on the fly, we didn't tell you about this.
I'll do 2 kind of standby favorites that actually I can figure out a way to link them to this title. No, if people are one of the handful of people that I feel like in Canada who hasn't read it yet, they need to read The Break by Katarina Burnett. And I think everyone who lives in Winnipeg should read it. Anyone who lives on the prairie should read it. I think everyone should read it.
Yeah.
It's dissimilar in lots of ways, but in many ways, it's this generation's April Raintree, and it provides this like extraordinary glimpse into one slice of life for certain families in the North End, because certainly that neighborhood is diverse, just like all of the neighborhoods in our city. But yeah, it's an amazing book, and she weaves together so many characters and families, and it's one of those things where I had to keep track of it, by writing them down a little bit. And when you realize, oh, this person is actually connected in that way, like those moments are just really magical. Some of the main characters feel a lot like Jared in that you're like, oh, this thing is going to happen again. Like this other thing's going to happen to them, and this other thing is going to happen. So like that feeling of kind of almost exhaustion reading it is very similar, but it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I agree.
And the other one that I think has has a little bit of the magic or the otherworldly, is a book that was published a number of years ago now. I don't think it's 10 years ago, but it might be. Is the poet Gregory Schofield's Louis the Heretic poems. It's an extraordinary book of poems, and some people are always like, oh, I don't read poetry. Other people are in love with poetry. I would say either. I mean, if people are interested at all in the history of the province and Mr. Rial, it's an extraordinary book. Schofield does lots of primary research, and he weaves together stories of Louis's life and his family and everything he went through. And if people are at all familiar with parts of that, there's a lot of talk of him, as all kinds of adjectives get used, but one of them is people talk about him as having gone mad. That gets talked about a lot, and talking to himself and when he was imprisoned and writing writings to the other side type thing. And there's a lot of sort of, I would call it magic and otherworldliness in Rial's story, and Schofield just weaves it together just brilliantly. It's an amazing book.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my recommendation, I haven't actually read yet. It just came across my desk on Friday, and what I'm sure is a coincidence, but everyone around this table might think it was magic.
Because you're dead inside, Alan. You're just dead inside.
And I was going to say not everything is magic, Alan. That's not what we're saying.
I don't understand this magic thing.
Apparently not.
How does magic work?
So mine is called Heartberries. It's a memoir by Teresa Marie Mailhot.
It's supposed to be amazing.
It looked really good. It definitely caught my interest. It's a coming-of-age memoir that takes place on the Seabird Island Indian Reservation in British Columbia. I really meant to read it this weekend because it's not very long. It's only like 130 pages, but then life got in the way. The New York Times called the title forgettable, although they did say not to be fooled by the title, which I think is a shame because the title is more than 50% of the reason that I gave the book more than a second glance. So that's Heartberries, which I think is a great title. And I can tell by Monique's face that she agrees with me.
New York Times.
What does the New York Times know?
Not much.
And Alan takes his titles very, very seriously. His book titles, yes.
Okay, so now it's time for Nerd Words for Word Nerds, the part of each show where each of our hosts picks a word, defines it, then explains why it has been tickling their tongue for the past month. Who's going first?
I will.
Okay.
Because I'm always like, oh yeah, I need to think of a word for the nerd words for word nerds, nerd words. Like I always get the phrase all wrong. Yeah. Anyway, so then I was like, nerd. What is that? So nerd is my nerd word.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow, this has gone meta.
I know. Okay. And because I didn't know the first maybe you guys all know where nerd came from.
Dr. Seuss?
Yes.
Yes.
Really? It came from Dr. Seuss, If I Ran the Zoo, in which the narrator Gerald McGrew claims he would collect a nerdcle, a nerd, and a seersucker too for his imaginary zoo. And then, so that was in 1950. And then there was the slang meaning of the word dates back to 1951 when Newsweek magazine reported on its popular use as a synonym for drip or square. That was my mom's favorite word, drip.
Drip?
Kirsten, don't be such a drip.
I think drip needs to come back.
And so then at some point, the word took on connotation for bookishness and social ineptitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
so me. Yeah.
But then there's this alternative spelling, which is N-U-R-D or G-N-U-R-D, which I quite love, actually.
Amazing.
And then there's this oral tradition that holds that the word is actually derived from nerd, K-N-U-R-D, which is drunk spelled backwards, which was used to describe these bookish, socially inept people who would rather study than party.
That's awesome.
And then, of course, the term was popularized in the 1970s by its heavy use in the sitcom Happy Days.
That's amazing.
Nerd.
Good nerd.
Awesome.
The good nerd.
My feelings of the word nerd, because nerd has kind of been reclaimed as a word. It's not as derogatory as it used to be, but I remember when that was just coming back and it was like geek or nerd, and there was kind of a battle between which one was going to be reclaimed, and I was on the geek camp, so
I'm going to reclaim
back to,
drip.
now, like geeking out and
that's
But
true.
I really like nerd with a G.
Yeah.
That was cool.
G-N-U-R-D.
Yeah.
Anyway, nerd.
Trevor, you look ready.
Well, I am ready. Well, as if by magic, Alan, you're talking about heart berries, and Monique, you mentioned Louis Riel. So my word is Saskatoon, also known as Paris of the Prairies, according to the Tragically Hip. It's the largest city in Saskatchewan, so take that, Regina. Founded in 1882 as a temperance colony. And then just 3 years later, they got involved in Canadian history when the Riel Rebellion happened, and both sides of the rebellion passed through Saskatoon on the way to Batoche. So these poor temperance people from out east saw history up close. Oh. Notable residents include former Governor General, who has since passed away, Raina Titian, hockey player Gordie Howe, Olympic speed skater Katrina LeMay-Doan, authors Guy Vanderhaeg, Jan Martel, and Farley Mowat, Joni Mitchell, who needs no introduction, and the professional wrestler Roddy Piper. Another thing to see in Saskatoon is the burial place of former Prime Minister... they're all former, I suppose, aren't they? Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, who was buried on the banks of the South Saskatchewan River at the University of Saskatchewan campus. And the funny thing with that is that wherever you go in his little tourist area, there's Canadian flags everywhere. And if you know anything about John Diefenbaker, he hated the Canadian flag. He filibustered against it in Parliament. And so now he's buried around literally hundreds of them. So it's a weird bit of irony. Yeah. But I also want to say Saskatoon, the city, was named for the berry. And this past, delicious. In the past week, it was the first time I ever had a Saskatoon. Really? Picked off of a bush, I suppose. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. In close to a national park, but not in a national park, I want to say. I was footsteps away. And that the Saskatoon is also known as the Pacific Service berry, the alderleaf shad bush, the dwarf shad bush, the chuckley pear, or the western Juneberry, and also known as the pigeonberry. It comes from the Cree Missakwatumin, and it also was an important ingredient in pemmican. So Canadian history all around. Saskatoon.
Very good. And the best pie in the world is a Saskatoon blueberry pie.
I really enjoyed it. You know, I can't believe I've gotten this far in life without having Saskatoons, but man, oh man, thumbs up from me.
Trevor's personal stamp of approval. My word is prestigious, and it came because I was reading Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed, is the Dear Sugar compilation. And she's writing, and this specific letter was in response to a 31-year-old who was bemoaning the fact that she had gone to a prestigious school and had this great education, and a bunch of her friends had gotten big book deals and she hadn't. And she's trying really hard to be happy for her friends and all this stuff, but where's my book deal kind of thing. And Sugar started talking about the idea that having gone to a prestigious school sometimes for some reason means that you deserve this sort of success in your life. And then she starts asking, what is a prestigious college anyway? And why did attending such a school allow you to believe, or what did attending such a school allow you to believe about yourself? And then she says, after encouraging her to go to the roots of the problem, she says, I imagine I'm a big fan of roots. You might, for example, be interested to know that the word prestigious is derived from the Latin prestigiae, which means conjurer's tricks. Isn't that interesting? This word that we use to mean honorable and esteemed has its beginnings in a word that has everything to do with illusion and deception and trickery. Ooh. When I found this out, every tuning fork inside of me went hum. Could it be possible that the reason you feel like you swallowed a spoonful of battery acid every time someone else gets what you want is because a long time ago, way back in your own very beginnings, you were sold a bill of goods about the relationship between money and success, fame and authenticity, legitimacy and adulation? And I thought that was so amazing that that's where the word prestigious comes from.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. So that was my word.
Speaking of prestigious,
I learned so much at this podcast.
The Prestige. Has anyone seen the movie or the book?
Yeah.
I think it's one of the few cases where the movie is far, far, far superior to the book.
That's a good movie. I haven't read the book.
Yeah, it's not very good. Don't do it.
Okay.
My word is panniers. So traditionally, a pair of baskets, bags, or boxes that are slung over the back of a beast of burden to distribute weight evenly. The term has been carried over to bicycles and motorcycles. And I think the term is especially apt when I sling my panniers over my bicycle, as my bicycle has a name name. It's named for the horse in the book I was reading when I was doing my first bike tour through northern Minnesota. I was reading John Steinbeck's East of Eden, so the name of my bicycle is Doxology. And so the reason it's on my mind this month is because I just finished another bicycle tour in which I went from Windsor, Ontario to Niagara Falls, which was exciting. And I'm glad it wasn't my first tour, because then the name of my book would be Triggers, because I'm reading Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith. So thank you so much, dear readers, for joining us on the septenary voyage of our Time to Read podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we have. Next month, we will be reading Walk Away by Cory Doctorow. Find it at your local Winnipeg Public Library branch and join our discussion on our website at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca or by emailing us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca. Remember to rate us 5 stars on iTunes, and until next time, make sure you find
Time to read.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Time to Read. We were discussing Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. Time to Read is a production of the Winnipeg Public Library. Your hosts today were Alan Chorney, Kirsten Werman, Erica Ball, Trevor Lockhart, and special guest Monique Woroniak. Our webmaster is Aaron Seaburn. Our social media guru is Regan Brew. Audio production music by Dennis Penner. Some of our comments today come from Amy and Pat. We want you to be part of the show too. Email us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca with suggestions for books that you'd like us to read and discuss, and comments and questions about the book we're reading for our next show. Visit us on the web at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. Check out our show notes with links to some of the things we talked about today, and take part in a discussion about the books we're reading. Next month, we're reading Walk Away by Cory Doctorow. We're looking forward to hearing what you think.
All I need is time to read. All I need is time to read. All I need is time to read. All I ever really need is a little more time to read.
What book is it?
This one.
Oh, this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
this one.